Hi everyone, welcome to today's session, Winning Combination, How Personalization and Analytics Drive Impact. I'm honoured to introduce Sally Jackson from National Grid. Sally is Senior Manager for Content and Channels and is part of the Colleague Communications and Engagement team at National Grid with over 18 years experience in internal comms and change. Sally, you're so welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So I will just invite you all to pop any questions that you have for Sally into the chat, and we'll try to get through as many of those in the session today. And with that, Sally, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Katrina. So first of all, hi everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, Populo. Really pleased to be able to join you. I'm going to be talking about personalisation, targeting and analytics as part of your overall internal communication strategy. We'll also be looking at effectively communicating results and insights to senior leaders in your organisation and any considerations on that front. We'll be looking at how to ensure people data meet your targeting and measurement needs, because that underpins both of those areas. And we're also going to be touching on what we're doing at National Grid to go beyond the metrics and the outputs and using those in combination with some deeper analytics and insights to kind of look at behaviours and outcomes that we're trying to measure in our internal communication strategy. So without further ado, I'm just going to move on to a little bit about our organisation. So National Grid, you might have heard of us, especially if you're in the UK, but you may not know about everything that we do. We're an energy company operating in both the UK and the US. We are delivering energy, electricity and gas safely, reliably and efficiently to customers and the communities we serve, all while working towards a clean, fair and affordable energy future. And that's our kind of underlying purpose. In the UK, we own and maintain the transmission network in England and Wales, and we're the largest electricity distribution network since we acquired an organisation which was called Western Power Distribution. And we also run the electricity system operator as a separate business. So that's the part of the organisation that manages the supply and demand on the network in the UK. We have gas and electric distribution and transmission businesses in the northeastern US, so mainly in New York and Massachusetts and some other states as well. And we supply energy directly to US consumers as well, which makes it a slightly different model to how we work in the UK. Our people, important to talk about this, to internal communicators. So we have over 35,000 colleagues, with nearly half in operational and field roles. Really important part of our organisation. We have offices in the US and the UK, with most traditional office roles now hybrid. And that includes a number of people who work within our business units as well as our corporate functions. Our field force is geographically dispersed and works in a range of different environments. So that could be substations, up pylons and wind turbines at liquefied natural gas depots, tunnels under London, interconnectors, where we are connecting. We've got underground pipelines and cables that go run under the sea between mainland Europe and the UK, and also power stations as well in the US. And then in addition to that, we have some quite unique roles in contact centres and control room, who have some key distinctions between some of our kind of more our kind of hybrid office roles. Our internal channels, so we have a set of core internal channels with our intranet at the centre. This is called Grid Home, and our other channels support that, such as our weekly targeted and personalised news roundup called Grid News. We also have emails that go out for kind of leadership strategic updates called Grid Updates, and we use Yammer, soon to be Viva Engage, for social collaboration and communication between colleagues right across the organisation. We also are relaunching our team conversation channel, Grid Talk, this year, and we also have a range of other channels and content types that kind of underpin and support these this core set of channels, but these are consistent right across our organisation and our business units. The purpose of them is to keep everybody connected company-wide, create alignments to our central strategy and our purpose, but at the same time, we want to be able to offer a tailored and personalised experience and create more of a local feel for people, so they can feel like that closer connection and relevance to some of the content that they're seeing. Ultimately, it's about helping to make people's lives easier at work, and that's kind of underpins everything we do, that audience focus. Our channel work is supported by some fundamentals, and some of those things we're going to be talking about today. So the people data, the data that we use, planning, training, governance, and importantly, measurement. So we have an approach for all of those things in place for every single one of our channels. Now I'm going to start talking about personalisation first before we go into measurement. I've got this nice quote which I think sums up a little bit about what's going on more broadly around personalisation and targeting right now, from a recent report by McKinsey. 76% of consumers get frustrated when they can't find a personalised experience with a brand. And it, you know, when you're working in an organisation as well, a lot of what we kind of expect for internal communications is driven by our experiences outside of work as well. We know that the lines are blurred more and more, and you know, we need to align that in terms of our approach as well as internal communicators. Personalisation, the preference for personalisation has some kind of psychology kind of rationale behind it, and it arises from a desire for control in the information that you're kind of receiving and digesting, the things that you need to do in your busy life, and related to that, a need to reduce information overload in a busy world, which, as I think we can all appreciate, can become a bit of a headache sometimes. And there's this expectation, as I mentioned, for this consumer grade experience. And as younger generations start to come into the workforce who've grown up with digital around them, these expectations are only increasing. We cannot control or prevent all the noise. I think that would be an impossible task, but we can allow colleagues greater control over what they see and interact with. We can also help draw out the most important things for our people, and that's something that we do within our weekly news roundup. So everything is available on our intranet. We make it a core principle that important things go onto our intranet. So whenever we send out an email, there's a copy there as well. It's all searchable and referenceable. But actually, there's a lot of things to kind of go through and sift through, and people are busy. So what we do is each week, our communications team get together. We have an editorial meeting, and we help select the most important things for our people, things that they need to do, things they need to know to do their jobs, and things that also kind of help them understand the organisation that they're working for. So we can't possibly pull through everything, but we select the most important if time is limited. And then if you've got time and you want to do more, then we also have opportunities for people to then go in and opt into other communications, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Analytics are a really important part of this as well. So we can use the analytics to understand what our people are interested in and engaged in to help with future targeting decisions. I think that's a really, really important thing to kind of think about, how the two things work together hand in hand. The opt-in side of things also signals back to us, you know, what people are interested in. So we can see how people are personalising their kind of news view on our intranet, for example, or if they're signing up for certain content in our weekly news roundup, then we can make sure that we're targeting more relevant content to those audiences as well. So a little bit about the distinction. We use both kind of push targeting and personalisation, where we're helping kind of reduce the noise and select content for specific audience groups in National Grid. And then we use a kind of pull side of things as well, so allowing the audience some control to select content of interest to them and to opt in. The reason why it's important, I think, to use a mix of the two is that it helps to prevent self-selection bubbles or echo chambers, whilst also giving colleagues some control over what they want to see too. So it's a balance, but I think it's good to kind of use both in combination. Some examples of what we're doing right now at National Grid, which might help you think about different ways you might want to approach this as well. In terms of the push side of things, we've talked about the weekly news roundup It's really, really great. And it also drives people back towards our intranet as well. And we see a huge spike in numbers going each week when we send that email out. We have colleague announcement emails that are targeted. Our intranet has targeted homepages and news, menus and page variants depending on your profile. So for example, we have a new starter homepage, people managers homepage. We sometimes have different variations of news stories or content because of differences in process or language between UK and US colleagues, for example, or even between business units. Yammer is another great example where you've got both push and pull. So Yammer or Viva Engage has a home feed which is AI driven, and that will make recommendations to you based on your previous interactions about things to look at. We can also feature posts and make announcements as well, which we use in moderation so people don't kind of become blind to them, but for really important things it's a great way to elevate important things that you want people to look at. And we know that with featured posts and announcements we do get much higher levels of interest, views and engagement too. And we're also looking at a more localized content approach on some of our channels, like on our intranet and in our news roundup, looking at making sure that we've got that kind of business unit feel and content has space for people to view. On the pull side, we have sign-up options in our weekly news roundup for US colleagues who, for example, might be based in Massachusetts but work with the New York business unit, so they can opt in to see content from both of the business units there. We have intranet apps and tools that people can select and kind of create their own customized view. We have our intranet newsfeed, which also can be customized by the individual to follow different topics and business areas. And we have Yammer communities, which people can sign up to join to stay up to date on, on specific areas of interest to them or parts of the business that they want to work with. You can follow individuals and topics, and that again is a way to kind of make sure you're seeing things that you want to see on that channel. Moving on to measurement. So I'm going to start off with another quote on this, and I think Seth Godin is fantastic. So I really like this quote. It sums up really nicely. Measurement is fabulous unless you're busy measuring what's easy to measure instead of what's important. I think that's extremely insightful. Why do the right analytics matter? We can use analytics to derive really important insights into behaviours and preferences of our colleagues. We can see what content they're interested in or not, which can help drive future decisions and recommendations to our stakeholders. How long into content they switch off. So that helps us kind of look at lengths of videos, podcasts, articles, and so on, and help drive our strategy in that area. When they prefer to digest content and interact. So for example, we can get some great insights at enterprise level in Populo about when people tend to look at emails and behaviours there, and we can use that to help drive decisions around when to issue emails. We can look for changes in behaviour as well, and that is really interesting. So we can see, for example, if there is a decline in interest in a channel, in views, in types of content, that we can go and investigate why that might be. Are there any other factors? And that links to the next point. It can be used to help identify problems for you to address to improve engagement and effectiveness of your channels and your content as well. I think a really great example there for us would be with our field. We know that we've been able to identify through analytics and looking at different audience segments, which parts of our organisation are not using channels as much as others. And then we can go and investigate further about what the reasons for that may be. Is it that we don't have the right content? Is it that they're not accessible? Do they not have time? Do they not have the devices? What other blockers might there be? And that is a really useful thing to help drive your strategy. In terms of a strategic approach to measurement, thinking about how these things all fit together, what we try to do is start with a business strategy. So our business has performance measures, we have performance contracts that we all follow, and we're kind of looking at, what is the business focusing on over the next few years? What are the really important things that we need people to get behind? And then our communication strategy underpins that. So our outcomes in our communication strategy are tied really firmly to our business performance measures. Within our team, we then look at a more granular level at channel measurements. So my team look at the effectiveness of our intranet, for example, how we're using email, our newsletter. We also look at content across the board and how that's performing by different topics and content types. And then on an individual campaign or comms plan level, members of our team who are leading on those will do their own measurement activities. Alongside that, we have employee surveys and listening feedback that goes on. And all of those things are then fed into our comms dashboard, and that allows us to track how we're doing against those strategic outcomes that are linked back to business strategy. We also look at some operational measures as well for our own team. And all of those things are kind of churned, looked at. We look at the trends over time. We look at internal and external benchmarks as well. We look at feedback alongside the analytics, and those insights will then feed back into what we're reporting back. So we can evidence progress against our communication strategy. And then what we do is we take the really high level insights and the kind of top, what I call kind of just tier 1 insights, and feed those back to senior leaders about how we're performing. An example from our organisation, within the last 12 months, we've had a safety campaign. The campaign was to deliver a new set of safety principles, increase understanding and engagement, and drive participation in safety activities. Safety performance is, obviously it's a really important focus area in our organisation. A lot of our people do some very, very dangerous work, and it underpins absolutely everything we do, and the safety of our people is absolutely paramount. Our communication strategy included a focus campaign to deliver this new set of principles. And what we did was we were able to target, because of our channels and the kind of personalisation targeting options, we were able to target communications at key audience groups. So we were able to target communications really easily at our people managers and give them specific calls to action to deliver things with their teams. So they were given materials, they had a kind of a kick-off call with senior leaders, had really, really high take-up, we're pleased to see. And then we were able to see the actions that went on through a series of activities over the campaign period. We saw really high uptake. We've actually, since the campaign, have had ongoing safety comms, but we're seeing an improvement in safety performance, which is the ultimate business outcome. But we've also been able to demonstrate an increase in engagement. We saw a huge uptick in Yammer activity during the campaign, and we were also able to demonstrate the impact leader involvement had there. So when leaders got involved on Yammer, sharing their safety stories and why they stay safe, then that led to so many people taking part, and we saw a huge increase in activity on that platform during that period. We also saw an increase in participation in the annual safety survey as well. Coming back to our measurement approach and our dashboard, what we do is we try to look at our key strategic measures on a quarterly basis. We do also do lots of other measurement between those periods as well. And what we do on this dashboard is we measure key components of our strategy. So we break down our strategy into the kind of key outcomes, and then we look at a small number of outcomes that we're going to measure against each of those and track. The top tier measures so we have one top tier measure against each of those areas. Those feed into the wider people strategy and our people function performance contract. So there's a really, really clear connection. We're also considering different measurement needs as well. So this dashboard is at a more strategic level, but we also have kind of reporting at channel level, campaign level, and more of that operational stuff that's really, really useful for our own team and for our stakeholders, but actually that level of detail isn't needed for our leaders. What we also do is realign this periodically. So we've actually had a recent reset of our strategy, and our dashboard is in the process of being realigned to that to make sure that we are measuring the right things. So focus on 4 key areas for 2023. Our dashboard that we're looking at, our kind of evolved dashboard for this year and the year after, most probably, we're going to be looking at 4 areas. So we'll have a kind of a key strategic outcome for each of these areas, and then we'll have a number of kind of second tier measures beneath those. We'll be looking at the culture and the areas we want to shift. We want to have an increased focus on performance, on our customers, and on our kind of leadership communications and trust and open and honest leadership communications. So those areas we're looking at, and we'll be tracking some scores from our culture survey, from our engagement survey, and also any campaigns that we're delivering in those areas and engagement in that content. Connecting the dots is about how colleagues stay connected and understand our purpose, vision and values in the bigger picture. So we'll be looking at engagement scores in those areas. We'll also be looking at channel reach and engagement for those audience segments where we want to grow, where we've got gaps at the moment, such as our field. And we'll be looking at interest and interaction in strategic content too. Our values, the how we do things, are equally important, and that's an area that we're focusing on as well. Again, we have a value specific question in our survey, but we'll also be gathering some feedback through focus groups this year on that. And then supporting transformation, we will be looking at any kind of change communication engagement scores, onboarding and offboarding for our channels as we onboard new business units and offboard other business units, and we'll be looking at the specific engagement scores within those areas compared to the average in the organisation, and channel reach for new business units as well. Those are some kind of real examples of the kinds of things we'll be measuring this year. In terms of our data and analytics sources, we've got all the traditional ones, and then there may be some here that you aren't using at the moment. I'd love to hear from you if you're also doing some other things that aren't listed here. We have channel analytics, obviously, so likes of Populo, Unily. We get some really great insights from these tools, and although we say, we don't want to just measure metrics, actually they're a really important part of the equation and can give us some fantastic data to work with. Interviews are another great way to get some really deep, meaningful insights to kind of validate what you're seeing in your data. Focus groups and targeted surveys as well. So we try to minimize the number of surveys we run outside of our engagement survey, but for example, we might run a targeted survey for a pilot. We also use user experience exercises for some of our channels, so card sorting, for example, to look at the information architecture and navigation on our intranet. That's something we're doing at the moment to get feedback on how people interact with the platform. Are we designing it in the right way for how they actually use it? Quick polls and quizzes are another great way to get a kind of quick soundbite on how people are feeling about something, how something's landing, the understanding as well. We used quizzes for some of our kind of strategic campaigns to test and level of understanding, and also the number of times people take a quiz to pass can be very telling in terms of people's interest and desire to learn more about a topic. And finally, social channels are not just about sharing information. In fact, they really should be equally about listening, and something I would say to leaders as well, that they're a great source of finding out about how people are feeling in the business, what's important to them, what they're talking about. So I'm just going to share a few insights here around how we're using measurement and some things that we have discovered in National Grid. Some of you probably doing some of these things already, but just some considerations for you. So my first insight, use data to understand audience gaps, because this data gives us the ability to see which audiences are not engaging in content or are, and where engagement is lower or higher. We're using this to shape the evolution of our channel and content strategy right now. We can see our fields in the US in particular are not able to access our digital channels as easily as other areas. We need to look at things like, are we getting the content right? Do we have enough relevant content to draw in our audiences? Do we need to increase investment in our channels and channel accessibility? And also, do we need to look at ways to integrate useful tools and applications for these audiences? In terms of feedback for senior leaders, they can use we can use this to help inform future strategy development and investment in those things that matter. So I've talked about investment in channels. We need our leaders to be on board with that. So using this data to help make a business case can be really, really powerful. At National Grid, this has really been influencing our people strategy and our communication strategy for a key audience, our vital fields and operational teams, as I mentioned, and that's something that we're really focusing on as an organisation over the next few years. My second insight is quality over quantity. So as our channels mature, content creation has inevitably increased. We want to keep although we can't control everything, as I said, we can try and kind of give things a sense of order and give things a bit more space so people have time to digest them. We have discovered through data analysis a clear negative correlation between the number of stories and engagement. So as the story volume increases, after a certain point, average engagement drops. So as a result, we are reducing the number of stories in our key channels to give them space to land. We're not trying to do comms by numbers, but we have guidelines. So, sometimes you have busier weeks than others, and that's okay. And I think you need to be flexible about this, but try to reduce the news flow a little bit, test it out, see, do articles have enough time to be viewed over multiple days? You can't assume that people are working every single day of the week, and they might miss something really important if you put too many stories up at once. Actively limiting the number of news roundup email articles as per Populo's best practice guidelines is something we also do. So we always try to aim for about 8 to 12 or thereabouts articles in each individual's edition. We're also revisiting our training materials and plans for people who create content so that they've got access to that latest guidance and best practice. Insight number 3. Understanding what content performs well and what doesn't. So we use the analytics alongside analysis of content types and some of the attributes of that content to get a fuller picture. So we'll track the performance of key content types such as video, written news, content across different channels. And we're starting to use the advanced analytics in Populo to tag content types aligned to the content types that we want to focus on in our internal comms strategy. So we'll be able to see, are we getting the balance right? Are we focusing enough of people's attention on those really important topics? Is there too much noise? And also, are people even engaging in that? So that's going to be really beneficial to us this year, and we are really excited about using that. In terms of engagement, we look at what against media type, video, events and so on, and we also look at those different attributes that I mentioned. So we can look at read, view times, story formats, layout. Are you breaking up text using bullet points, long pieces of prose, images used, titles, are they catchy, do they tell you what it is, are you using stand firsts, how has the story been promoted? So there are a number of different things we look at alongside those numbers. And we also look at kind of the potential audience size, not just everybody who's got access to the platform, but who you're targeting. We found that obviously the shorter content, interviews and the people stories, the kind of human interest stories perform so well. Fun image, especially an image of a dog or a cat, always does really well as well, and different channels can work better for different content. So we're really starting to be able to advise our stakeholders on what might sit better on Yammer and where you want to create more kind of interaction. Insight 4, combine data sources, channel metrics plus other data and insight sources. So some examples here. Engagement survey. If you've got an engagement survey, use it. Look at those questions that are linked to your campaigns and activities. Look at trends over time. If you've got free text comments and you have the time, it really can be beneficial to code those text comments. Look at sentiment as well. You can get some really useful information out of there to look at alongside your metrics. We also look at feedback from informal channels, so social I talked about already, focus groups and card sorting exercises, for example. An example where we kind of looked at data across a variety of sources to take action was somebody in our team produced some content around our position on AI, hot topic, Yammer, external media and questions from Q&A sessions at events were telling us that this was on people's minds and they wanted to know what the stance was, what are we doing about it, what does it mean for us at National Grid. So using all of that information, we then were able to get a really quick response out from senior leadership. Communications were issued, and that story, although it's been sat across a number of channels, was the third highest performing story over the last quarter. And following that communication, the Yammer chat has slowed down significantly. So it just shows how, you know, using those metrics and listening, and you can kind of track the effectiveness of what you're doing as well. Insight 5 is my last insight: use analytics to take action and change behaviours. So we talked about opt-in personalisation, so using it, we're using it to varying degrees across channels. Data is telling us that uptake is really low on our intranet at the moment, although it provides great opportunities for that. Using this data means we can take corrective action to help improve the experience for our people. This year, we're going to be promoting and educating on personalisation, and we're going to be looking at ways to make it easier to customise your view. So we're going to be making some changes to where the customisation button is, make it easier to locate, make it larger, and make sure that it's really prominent on that homepage. So, insights for leaders. Layers of measurement. So I'm talking to lots of communicators here, I think. I always treat measurement like a communications plan. Break down your measurement approach in the same way you target your communications for different audiences. You can't use a one-size-fits-all approach. So you can't just create, and you know, I've been guilty of this myself, you can't create one single dashboard that's going to tick the boxes for all of the different stakeholders. So you need to look at it in layers. You'll have tactical one-off measurement, campaigns that you'll be wanting to measure, comms plans, channel effectiveness, your team strategy, and then the business impact. So I think it's just something to really think about, that each level, think about who it is you're communicating with, design your approach, and you know, pull out the things that are relevant for them. So for your leaders, they're not going to want to know about how you channel your channel effectiveness in detail. What they're going to want to know is, are the really important kind of business topics landing? Are we seeing changes in behaviour? How is employee engagement? How do people feel about leaders in the organisation? Do they feel safe at work? And so on. Those are the things that they will want to know about. And I would just keep it really simple, pick a few outcomes and share insights alongside those numbers as well for your senior leaders. What's the so what? Final note on people data. So I mentioned this before. This is something that underpins everything that we've talked about. Absolutely essential. My top tips for success are: work with IT and HR data teams to understand the art of the possible. What fields are available, what data is kept up to date and is more accurate. Don't assume that the fields that are there are accurate. Understand how data and data integrations work. Even if you're not technical, it really will be beneficial if you can spend a bit of time learning about integrations, about logic as well. Think about how you want to segment and target, and then feed in those requirements to the to your kind of integration team to see, is that field available? Why not? Let's have a look at, so maybe there are others who need this in the business as well, and maybe that could be something that's created within your HR data in the future. And a final point, work with other people data users. There'll be others in the organisation who don't work in communications who also use the people data. You might have similar requirements, you might have similar issues and challenges. In fact, it's probable. So get together and talk to those people, and you might be able to find new solutions and ways of working. And actually, the more of you have got the same requirements, the more likely you're going to be able to make changes to that data. So we don't actually own the data in comms, we're users of the data, but actually we need to talk to those people who manage those systems and own the data. So in our organisation, we use our HR data, feed it into our core channels using integrations, APIs, and we use that to ensure we have the latest data. It depends on it obviously being updated. We look at things like grade, location, business unit, manager status, But in the future, it would be great if we could access data based on personas, such as whether someone's a hybrid office worker or in the field. I think we can find ways to track down those groups at the moment, but it would be great if we had those segments ready to go. So that's something that we're looking at the moment. And that's all I wanted to say on people data, really. But I'm sure many of you here will have similar challenges. So just to round things up, rules of measurement. My personal rules of measurement. Start with measurements. Don't apply it as an afterthought. So whenever you're developing a strategy, developing a plan, even a one-off activity, think about what you're trying to achieve here. And actually you should be doing that anyway when you're thinking about your tactics. So what outcome do you want? What change in behaviour you want? And if you do that at the front, you'll have thought about what measurement you need to do rather than going quickly scrabbling for whatever data is available as an afterthought. Don't be afraid of tracking strategic outcomes where comms are not fully responsible. I think we can be a bit scared to track some of these bigger strategic pieces, but we can still demonstrate an impact on employee engagement, leadership, communication, for example. There are plenty of models out there that show the role communication has to play in some of those things. Number 4, pick a few key things to put on your dashboard, but also do track wider data. So I do think, come back to Seth's quote, focus on the things that matter. But actually, if you do have a bit of time to just track general data usage data, you might see some interesting trends. But if you don't have time, just focus on those few things that matter. Combine quantitative and qualitative data from multiple sources to get those richer insights. So use the metrics alongside the feedback, the focus groups, the listening tools. And that will give you really, really rich, meaningful information to work with. External benchmarks are useful. We definitely use them in some areas, but actually if you build your own over time, this can be more powerful because there are obviously unique things about your colleagues, about your organisation, about your industry, and that can't, you're never quite comparing like for like. If you're starting to track your own data over time, you can look at seasonal trends, you can look at how types of campaign land in your organisation and what good looks like, and use that to really kind of help guide others in the organisation too on their comms. And then finally, I think possibly the most important point, don't be afraid of a negative trend. I think it can be a bit scary when you see the numbers go down, but actually it's also about listening, and it's a journey. And often any change provides useful insight to help us take corrective action or to improve things. So although it can be a bit scary to kind of approach and look at negative trends and be open about it, actually in the longer term, you will get so much more out of this if you can embrace that. So I'm just going to finish now and open up to questions.
Thank you so much, Sally. Some really great takeaways and insights. And we do hear from organisations that it can be a real struggle to get that one unified view, bringing data sources in from different comms platforms and tools. So thank you so much for telling us how you're achieving that in National Grid. I'm ready with some questions from the chat if you were.
Yep, that's fine. Go for it.
Excellent. So first question, what size team or additional resources do you need to successfully orchestrate a change campaign and ultimately measure the outcome?
So in terms of change campaign, we had one person who was leading on that change campaign, but actually other than that, we all worked together across our colleague communications team. So they kind of led the campaign, but activated and involved people from right across all of our business units functions. My team, the content channels team, also would support on any big campaigns like that as well, and we'll advise, make recommendations on what to how best to approach things. In terms of the kind of the measurement side of things, This work can really be scaled up or down depending on what resources you've got available to you. So ideally, measurement should be part and parcel of everyone's job in internal comms, and I'd consider it a core competency for internal communicators. Whether you're in a specialist or generalist role, I do think it's really, really important. But it can also be beneficial to have someone who's centrally coordinating the approach if you do have a larger team and you're lucky enough to have the budget, and I have seen that in some organisations. This could include providing guidance on how and when to use analytics, pulling together central reporting and any dashboards, providing internal benchmarks and designing and running training, and it just kind of helps with that consistency across the team. If you don't have the luxury of having someone who can kind of manage that full time, we don't. We build it into our central content channels team roles, but it would be great if you could kind of appoint that as part of somebody's role to look at your measurement approach so you can drive that consistency. We do have somebody as well, and I know this may be the same in lots of other big organisations, who manages the employee engagement survey and the colleague listening approach specifically, and we will work really closely with them in the content and channels team to ensure that we are aligned. So yeah, it's kind of not one size fits all approach, but ideally have someone to focus on it. But if not, everyone should be doing a little bit of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really encouraging message as well. It start and it can be scaled up or scaled down.
Exactly.
So Sally, how do you balance the level of opt-in content employees want to receive versus the strategic need to know content that you have to share on behalf of the organisation?
Well, one of our core principles that we have in our strategy is about putting the audience first over stakeholders. So in terms of what they need to know to do their job and to feel connected to the organisation. So it needs to tick those boxes really, rather than be driven by what stakeholders want to share, what projects they want to shout about. We always try to consider the audience impact before anything else. We then try to limit the amount of information we push to colleagues through careful planning, data-led decisions, which will help with managing those stakeholder conversations as well, and best practice guidelines, which we always like to have to hand. So I love things like the popular ones because they are really, really helpful to have for those conversations. We've also asked business leaders to prioritise areas where we want to make a strategic impact over the next year, so we can focus our efforts on those. I feel like in lots of organisations since the pandemic, there's almost been like an overdrive of activity, and there's really an opportunity now to kind of refocus and reset and simplify a little bit. So it's partly about stakeholder conversations, partly about having that data to do that as well. We've chosen flagship campaigns and promoted content topics, which as part of our strategy, which will kind of take centre stage and priority on some of our channels and parts of our channels. And then colleagues can follow and engage in more of the informal and user-generated stuff at their own pace on our intranet and social channels. So, if people only have limited time, then we at least know that they're getting those essential things within our kind of guidelines around quantity.
Excellent. And you're striking a balance.
Yeah, exactly.
So Sally, during the session, you really enforced the message to measure what's important and the right analytics. So this was a great question. In the safety campaign that you ran was hugely important to the business and sounds like it was a big success. Mm-hmm. In terms of metrics, what numbers were senior leaders most interested in, and how did you show IC's impact on those numbers with that campaign?
So our colleague survey ran not too long after the campaign period, and so we've been able to track safety related scores and comments as well as improvements in safety performance. So that's obviously the most important outcome here, keeping our people safe. So both of those things were of interest to our senior leaders and have been tracked really carefully. At a functional level, the safety team, the SHS team, were also interested in safety survey responses and participation in the campaign and the mobilisation engagement on things like on Yammer, for example, participation in campaign events. So we've been able to show during the period where we ran the campaign a direct change in outcomes as well as participation and it directly correlated with that campaign period very, very clearly.
Very interesting. Just in follow up to that, how long typically, so time period or duration of campaign length before you'd actually expect to see employee change or change in behaviour there?
So it really depends on what it is you're trying to change and how big a change it is. But we look at, our organisation looks at performance quarterly. So we tend to track and look at those changes between those periods as well. We'll also then look at the longer term changes year on year, for example. So with safety, you know, it's not a one and done exercise. This is something that's ongoing, and we'll be continuing to track that over the coming years to make sure that we're kind of maintaining and improving on that front. We've been tracking our data on our channels and our campaigns and so on in quite a lot of detail now for about 3 years. So we've got a huge amount of data to work with, and we're really able to use that to look back and see significant shifts and changes. We can see seasonality as well, and we can look at those longer term trends. I think, for example, another good example would be, you know, where you've got change in the organisation, you'll tend to see a dip in scores around effectiveness of change communication when you're doing a lot of change communication, and it's actually only in the kind of the 6, 9, 12-month period after that that you'll start to see positive increase in those scores again. So it really will vary on the type of thing you're looking at.
Excellent. And we've time for one more question, so maybe a good parting question for Sally. Sally, have you any advice for someone who is only using the basics in terms of measurement? So when you've just been focusing on open and click rates, where do you suggest going next?
I'd say it's about going back to the business to understand what the business is trying to achieve. Look for ways to capture changes in behaviour and delivery of those specific outcomes. Keep it really simple. It might be 2 or 3 things that you're looking at. For example, if DEI is really important to you, diversity, equity and inclusion, you could be looking at increasing the number of people participating in ERGs. It could be about people setting DEI objectives and other kind of actions that you want people to take in the organisation. It could be a change in, you know, in other DEI targets and set by the business that need to be met. So trying to think about something to measure at the start, creating your communications plan that aligns to the objectives is a really, really important part of that. So at the strategic level, business outcomes, pick a couple of things that you're going to look at, and then the same with your communications plans and campaigns. What is it you're trying to get people to do, or, you know, do differently, or understand, or, you know, what is the outcome, and then just pick something to measure to align to that, rather than just trying to measure everything that you've done around that campaign. Take a look at your strategy. Think about how you can demonstrate progress against it. So if it's about launching new channels, seeking feedback on those channels alongside the open click rates could be a good start. Look at whether things being communicated in that channel are being actioned. You could also look at other existing data sources that you've got. You know, if you've got an engagement survey, use that. If you've got a social channel, have a look at what's going on there. So you don't need to necessarily launch a massive kind of series of focus groups or piece of research to get started. Use what you've already got there. Even running some interviews, you know, that doesn't take a huge amount of time, and you can get some really meaningful insights. Just make sure that it doesn't have to be done on a large scale when you're getting qualitative feedback. Just need to make sure you're including representation from different colleague groups.
Sally, incredible insights and advice. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights from National Grid.
Thanks, Katrina. It's been great to see you, and I hope everyone found that useful.
Thank you.